At the beginning of the 20th century, humanity was intoxicated with progress. Machines were becoming faster, cities were rising higher, and distances were shrinking. But the true symbol of the era was neither the train nor the ocean liner. It was the sky. People no longer looked at it as an unreachable void. They looked at it as a route. Germany, recovering from defeat in World War I and burdened by the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, sought new ways to demonstrate its strength. One of those ways became airships. They had existed before, but now they were meant to become something far greater, not merely aircraft, but floating palaces. Thus emerged a giant more than 245 meters long, nearly the size of an ocean liner, suspended in the air. Its aluminum framework consisted of hundreds of interconnected sections, forming a rigid skeleton resembling the ribs of an enormous whale. Inside were 16 gas cells filled with hydrogen, the lightest gas known to mankind. The use of hydrogen was not a matter of preference. Germany had hoped to obtain non-flammable helium from the United States, but the American government refused to export the strategic resource. Politics had already begun shaping technology. Hydrogen was cheaper, accessible, and far more dangerous. Still, engineers trusted their calculations. The gas was contained in separate cells. Ventilation systems were installed. Electrical wiring was insulated. On paper, the risk seemed minimal. Inside the airship was something astonishing for its time. The passenger cabins, though compact, were comfortable. There was a dining salon with white tablecloths, polished metal tableware, and uniformed stewards. There was even a specially pressurized smoking lounge, the only place on board where fire was permitted. Air pressure inside it was kept slightly higher than in surrounding compartments to prevent hydrogen from entering. Each transatlantic crossing was an event. Passengers felt they were participating in a technological miracle. They could stroll through corridors, look down through angled observation windows, and watch clouds drifting beneath them. Unlike airplanes of that era, the airship did not shake violently or roar with engines. It moved smoothly, almost silently. Hot meals were served. Music played softly. The journey itself became a ritual of elegance. Newspapers wrote that the future belonged to such vessels. In the spring of 1937, a new season of transatlantic flights began. The giant was scheduled to make regular crossings between Frankfurt and New York. Germany aimed to present to the world not only engineering brilliance, but reliability. On May 3, 1937, the airship departed Frankfurt. On board were 36 passengers and 61 crew members. Among them were businessmen, journalists, and members of high society. Some flew for prestige, others for speed, others simply out of curiosity. Commanding the vessel was Captain Max Pruss, a man of extensive experience. The crew consisted of disciplined professionals with hundreds of flight hours behind them. For them, this voyage marked a routine beginning of the season. The first days passed calmly. The airship crossed the Atlantic at an altitude of roughly 200 meters. Weather conditions fluctuated but were manageable. Passengers wrote letters, kept journals, and took photographs beside the observation windows. American newspapers were already announcing the ship's approaching arrival. At the Naval Air Station in Lakehurst, preparations were underway. Ground crews inspected mooring lines, masts, and equipment. For many Americans, the arrival of the airship was as spectacular as a parade. Yet over New Jersey, a storm front was forming. The weather worsened. The atmosphere became heavy with moisture and electrical tension. Captain Pruss decided to delay landing, circling the coastline while waiting for improved conditions. The delay stretched into hours. Passengers grew restless, not fearful, but impatient. Some complained about the schedule. No one could foresee that atmospheric instability would become one of the decisive factors in what was to come. Within the metal framework, static electricity gradually accumulated. The vast surface of the hull interacted with moist air, friction, and temperature shifts. These processes were invisible. They made no sound. They offered no warning. By the evening of May 6, conditions improved slightly. The decision was made to proceed with landing. The ground crew took position. Photographers prepared their cameras. Radio reporter Herbert Morrison began recording his broadcast. The giant descended slowly. Its silver body reflected the fading light of sunset. To those watching below, it was a familiar and majestic sight. To the passengers, it was the conclusion of a comfortable journey. But hidden within the structure was a vulnerability. Even the smallest hydrogen leak, combined with a spark, could transform the airship into a torch. In theory, the probability was negligible. In reality, everything would be decided in seconds. The airship released its mooring lines. Ground crew members grasped them to guide the vessel toward the mast. At that moment, according to one theory, a gas cell in the tail section ruptured. Some witnesses later claimed they saw a faint bluish flash. Inside the ship, passengers felt only a slight jolt. That single second became the boundary between two eras. At 7:25 p.m. on May 6, 1937, the airship hovered approximately 60 meters above the ground at the Naval Air Station in Lakehurst, New Jersey. The maneuver was routine. The crew had performed it dozens of times before. The mooring lines had already been dropped, and members of the ground crew were moving into position to secure the massive vessel. From the outside, the scene appeared calm. Then it happened. Near the upper rear section of the hull, just ahead of the tail fins, a faint glow flickered. Several witnesses later described it as a bluish flame, small and almost delicate. For a fraction of a second, it seemed insignificant, a brief shimmer against the silver skin of the ship. But hydrogen does not forgive hesitation. The glow turned into a burst. The burst became a sheet of fire racing along the spine of the airship. Within moments, flames erupted through the fabric covering, licking upward and backward as if chasing the wind itself. Inside the structure, crew members in the tail compartment felt a violent tremor. The ship lurched. The framework groaned under sudden imbalance. Hydrogen from one gas cell had ignited, and in igniting, it compromised the integrity of neighboring cells. The fire did not explode in a single blast. Instead, it spread with terrifying speed, consuming the upper portion first. Witnesses on the ground watched in disbelief as the enormous body of the airship transformed into a burning silhouette against the evening sky. Radio reporter Herbert Morrison, who had been calmly narrating the landing, suddenly lost composure. His voice, recorded live, cracked with shock as he described the unfolding disaster. His anguished cry would later echo through history, becoming inseparable from the image of the catastrophe. On board, confusion turned into panic. Passengers in the lounge felt the floor tilt sharply. Windows shattered as heat intensified. The elegant dining salon, moments earlier filled with quiet conversation, was now flooded with smoke. Some passengers froze, unable to comprehend the scale of what was happening. Others reacted instinctively. A few rushed towards stairways and exits. Crew members shouted commands, attempting to guide people toward escape routes. The nose of the ship, still intact for several seconds, began to rise as the tail lost lift. Flames devoured the rear structure, collapsing it inward. The once rigid aluminum skeleton started folding under its own weight. 34 seconds. That was all it took. From the first visible flame to total structural collapse, less than a minute passed. As the burning framework descended, some passengers made desperate decisions. Those positioned closer to the forward section found themselves suddenly nearer to the ground as the ship tilted. A handful leapt from windows, hitting the earth with injuries but surviving the inferno. Crew members stationed near the control gondola fought to maintain stability for as long as possible, even as fire advanced behind them. Captain Max Pruss remained at his post until escape was no longer possible. On the ground, sailors and civilian workers rushed toward the flames despite the danger. They pulled survivors from twisted metal, cut through wreckage, and dragged the injured away from falling debris. The outer covering of the airship, coated with a mixture of cellulose and aluminum powder, burned rapidly. As flames consumed the hydrogen-filled cells, they collapsed one after another, creating the horrifying visual of the giant folding in on itself. Yet contrary to what many assumed, the hydrogen did not detonate in a massive explosion. It burned upward quickly, dispersing into the air. This rapid upward combustion may have saved dozens of lives, allowing some to escape before the structure completely disintegrated. When the wreckage finally settled on the ground, only a skeletal outline remained, blackened ribs arching over smoldering debris. Out of 97 people on board, 35 perished, along with one member of the ground crew. Considering the scale of the fire, the number of survivors was astonishing. Many escaped with burns, fractures, and trauma, but they lived. Photographers captured every stage of the disaster. Within hours, images of the burning airship were transmitted across the country. Newsreels replayed the collapse repeatedly in cinemas. For the first time in modern history, a technological catastrophe unfolded before the public eye in moving images and recorded sound. The visual impact was devastating. The Hindenburg had not simply crashed in a remote field. It had burned in front of cameras, reporters, and an assembled crowd. The world did not read about the tragedy days later, it witnessed it almost immediately. As night fell over Lakehurst, emergency crews combed through the wreckage. Survivors were transported to hospitals. Reporters sent urgent dispatches. The once proud symbol of engineering supremacy lay reduced to twisted metal and ash. In less than a minute, the future of passenger airships had gone up in flames. And as smoke drifted into the darkening sky, one question began to dominate headlines across continents. What had ignited the sky? By the morning of May 7, 1937, the charred remains of the airship still smoldered on the field at Lakehurst. Twisted aluminum girders arched upward like the ribs of a fallen cathedral. The smell of burnt fabric and fuel lingered in the air. Journalists, investigators, and military personnel moved carefully through the wreckage, aware that they were standing inside what would soon become one of the most examined disasters of the 20th century. The question was immediate and relentless: what caused it? The United States Department of Commerce, the U.S. Navy, and German authorities each launched formal investigations. Political tensions between nations made the inquiry delicate. The airship had not only been a passenger vessel, it had also been a symbol of national pride. Initial statements were cautious. No one wanted to speculate publicly. Yet speculation erupted almost instantly in newspapers around the world. One of the earliest theories centered on static electricity. The weather conditions that evening had been unstable. The air was humid, and a thunderstorm had recently passed through the region. As the airship maneuvered through the charged atmosphere, friction between the outer fabric and the surrounding air could have created a buildup of electrical charge across the hull. When the mooring lines were dropped to the ground, they may have altered the electrical balance between the ship and the earth. If part of the structure discharged unevenly, a spark might have formed between the metal framework and a leaking pocket of hydrogen. Investigators examined the tail section, where witnesses had first seen the flame. Several crew members reported hearing a muffled sound, not an explosion, but something like a structural snap. This detail supported the idea that a gas cell might have ruptured before ignition. But how would a gas cell rupture during landing? Some engineers suggested that a sharp maneuver earlier in the approach had strained internal bracing wires. If one of these wires snapped, it could have torn through the fabric of a hydrogen cell. Hydrogen, being colorless and odorless, could have leaked unnoticed into the upper cavity of the hull. In such a scenario, all that would be required was a small spark. Another theory focused not on the hydrogen, but on the outer skin of the airship itself. The covering fabric had been treated with a mixture containing cellulose acetate and aluminum powder. This combination was lightweight and reflective, helping protect the ship from sunlight and weather. Decades later, some researchers proposed that this coating might have behaved similarly to thermite, a substance capable of intense combustion. According to this theory, the outer surface ignited first, spreading flame rapidly across the hull before the hydrogen cells were fully involved. However, critics of this hypothesis pointed out that the chemical composition did not precisely match that of true thermite. Moreover, hydrogen flames tend to burn upward and almost invisibly, whereas eyewitnesses described dramatic orange fire sweeping along the structure. The investigation found no evidence of a bomb. Yet sabotage was widely discussed. In 1937, the political climate in Europe was increasingly volatile. Germany's rearmament under Adolf Hitler was drawing international concern. Could someone have planted an explosive device to damage German prestige? The Federal Bureau of Investigation interviewed crew members, passengers, and ground personnel. No credible evidence of sabotage emerged. No suspicious device fragments were found in the wreckage. The German Commission reached a similar conclusion. A hydrogen leak ignited by static discharge remained the most plausible explanation. Still, absolute certainty proved impossible. One of the challenges investigators faced was the speed of the destruction. The intense fire consumed crucial structural evidence within seconds. Much of the fabric disintegrated completely. What remained was primarily metal, warped, collapsed, and stripped of context. Survivor testimonies varied. Some described hearing a sharp report before the flames. Others recalled only a gentle shudder followed by immediate fire. Human memory, shaped by shock and trauma, could not provide consistent answers. Meanwhile, the global reaction was swift and decisive. Images of the burning airship filled newspapers across continents. Newsreels replayed the collapse repeatedly in cinemas. The recorded voice of Herbert Morrison, trembling with disbelief, became inseparable from the disaster itself. The psychological impact outweighed statistical reasoning. Objectively, airships had not been significantly more dangerous than airplanes of the era. In fact, commercial air travel in the 1930s carried substantial risk. Yet airplanes crashed out of sight, often in remote fields or distant mountains. The destruction of the Hindenburg unfolded in full view, captured from multiple angles, accompanied by live narration. The public saw fire consuming elegance. They saw modern engineering surrender to elemental force. Confidence evaporated. Almost immediately, Germany cancelled further passenger flights. The sister ship, the Graf Zeppelin II, would never carry transatlantic passengers in regular service. Within a short time, the era of large passenger airships effectively ended. The decision was not purely technical. It was emotional. Investors withdrew. Governments hesitated. Passengers refused bookings. The image of the burning airship had become too powerful to overcome. Behind closed doors, engineers continued debating improvements. Some argued that if helium had been available, the disaster might have been prevented. Helium, being non-flammable, would not have turned the ship into a torch. But helium was controlled almost entirely by the United States. And in the tense geopolitical environment of the late 1930s, export restrictions remained firm. Thus the investigation concluded without dramatic revelation. No villain was identified. No mechanical flaw could be isolated with certainty beyond the interplay of hydrogen and atmospheric electricity. Instead, the tragedy exposed a fundamental vulnerability. When ambition stretches against physics, the margin for error narrows to almost nothing. The Hindenburg had represented faith and controlled risk. Its destruction revealed how fragile that faith truly was. And as official reports were filed and commissions disbanded, one silent verdict had already been delivered by the public. The age of the sky giants was over. In the weeks after the disaster at Lakehurst, the world did not move on quickly. The image lingered. Newspapers stopped printing the photographs on the front page, but the memory had already taken root in the public imagination. The remains of the airship were cleared from the field. Twisted aluminum beams were dismantled and removed. The ground, once scorched and blackened, slowly returned to its ordinary appearance. Yet for those who had witnessed the event, the field never looked the same again. Germany faced not only the human tragedy, but a symbolic collapse. The airship had been more than transportation. It had been a demonstration of engineering mastery, national pride, and technological optimism. Its destruction became a blow to prestige at a time when image mattered profoundly. Official mourning ceremonies were held. The dead were honored. Survivors returned home carrying physical scars and psychological ones that would last far longer. Inside Germany's airship program, conversations turned from ambition to survival. Engineers reviewed blueprints. They examined gas containment systems, wiring insulation, hull materials. The sister vessel, The Graf Zeppelin II remained grounded while safety evaluations were conducted. But something irreversible had occurred. Public trust had vanished. Bookings for future flights collapsed almost immediately. Even those who had previously celebrated airship travel now hesitated. The elegance of floating above the ocean had been replaced in the collective memory by fire and falling metal. The Hindenburg had burned in front of cameras. That detail proved decisive. The disaster did not rely on rumor or distant reports. It had been seen, repeatedly, in cinemas across the world. The moving image of a colossal structure folding in flames carried more power than any statistical argument about relative safety. Aviation itself, however, did not stop. While airship programs faltered, fixed-wing aircraft continued to evolve rapidly. Airplanes were becoming faster, more efficient, and increasingly reliable. They could climb above weather systems rather than drifting within them. They required no vast gas cells vulnerable to ignition. The balance of the sky was shifting. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 sealed the fate of large passenger airships. Military priorities redirected industrial capacity. Aluminum was needed for bombers and fighters. Hydrogen-filled giants no longer fit into strategic planning. The Graf Zeppelin II flew only limited reconnaissance missions before being dismantled. The dream of luxury airship travel across the Atlantic quietly dissolved. Yet the legacy of the Hindenburg extended far beyond engineering. The disaster became a case study in risk perception. Objectively, airships had experienced relatively few catastrophic passenger losses compared to other transportation methods of the era. But risk is not measured only in numbers. It is measured in imagery, in narrative, in emotional impact. The Hindenburg's destruction provided a single, unforgettable symbol. Over time, historians and scientists continued analyzing the event. Improved understanding of combustion physics, materials science, and atmospheric electricity refined earlier theories. Many experts today consider a hydrogen leak ignited by static discharge to be the most probable cause. Others emphasize the role of the outer skin's flammability. What remains constant is the speed. 34 seconds. In less than a minute, a marvel of engineering collapsed into ruin. Yet it is equally important to remember the survival stories. Of the 97 people on board, 62 lived. Crew members who stayed at their posts until the last possible moment helped save passengers. Ground personnel ran toward danger rather than away from it. Acts of courage unfolded alongside destruction. Today, the site at Lakehurst includes a memorial marking the outline of the airship's hull. Visitors stand quietly within that footprint, attempting to grasp the scale of what once hovered there. Modern airships still exist, but they are smaller, filled with helium, and designed for specialized purposes. None have reclaimed the grandeur or ambition of the pre-war giants. The Hindenburg did not merely crash. It marked a turning point in technological history. It demonstrated that innovation without complete control carries consequences. It showed how political decisions, such as restricting helium exports, can intersect with engineering risk. It revealed how a single public catastrophe can redefine an entire industry. Most of all, it ended an illusion. The illusion that the sky could be conquered through elegance alone. The illusion that scale guaranteed safety. The illusion that progress moved in only one direction. As smoke rose into the darkening sky over New Jersey on May 6, 1937, it carried with it not just debris, but an era. The age of floating palaces above the Atlantic ended that evening. And in its place began a new chapter of aviation, faster, harsher, less romantic, but shaped forever by the lesson of a burning giant.